test just fine. No money's inured to private shareholders or individuals, both under law, state law, and under probably our own certificates of incorporation and things. We take care of that. So the real two other tests for being a valid 501c3 is one that you don't lobby as a substantial part of your activities. Although that's stated in the negative, what sits behind it is actually fairly positive, that churches are allowed to lobby legislators and their own members and members of the general public on issues that they care about as part of our overall the bundle of First Amendment rights that we get and any organization gets. And recognizing the fact that part of our charitable / religious activities as followers of Christ is to change people's hearts and minds, including their hearts and minds on issues of public importance. There is technically the substantial part test. All I would say about that is rule of thumb: get concerned if your church is spending more than 5 to 10% of your overall time and expenses on lobbying, but I can't imagine there are very many parishes that have to worry about that. The fourth part, and the part that I think Gary was kind of thinking about when he was asking his question earlier too, it is a definite negative. There is a blanket total prohibition on 501c3's involvement in the political process as opposed to the legislative process. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So I have to emphasize, this is a total prohibition. There is no de minimis exception to getting involved with candidates, either on their behalf or in opposition to them. There's really no gray zone here. You can't do indirectly what you can't do directly. And it means any candidate for any political office. Technically, if you're thinking about an incumbent who hasn't filed for re-election yet, there are things you can skirt around, but I think that's an exception rather than the rule. More important to think about not participating in any direct or indirect way on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for any office, which includes, by the way, offices that we may traditionally think of as being nonpartisan. So in some places, the school board, in places at least where I came from back east, some town councils were actually technically nonpartisan. So this is not a question of partisanship, but more of politics, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So just to finish this out, I think it's important to note in today's context, because there are politicians out there who spin this the other way. This prohibition applies to all 501c3s. It isn't just churches. So it applies to universities. It applies to arts organizations. Everybody. It's not, no one's singling out churches for not being able to participate in candidates' campaigns. And this is something, to give you just a flavor of it, there's a lot on this and I'll make it short. This is sort of balancing a couple of things. We trade off a little bit of our First Amendment rights in terms of being able to support or oppose candidates in exchange for both an exemption from federal taxes. We don't pay any federal taxes, and the all-important tax deductibility of donations that are made to us. And some of the fear was that if 501c3s were allowed to take positions in political campaigns, it would kind of become a funnel for sort of dark money in campaigns, since we don't disclose our donors. So if we go to the next slide, and I'll stop for questions after this slide, but I wanted to get us through that introduction first. Policy versus politics. So as May said a few moments ago, in today's environment, almost anything we say, especially heard by cynical ears, can be regarded as partisan, as political. It's very, very hard to even go to a party and have a free and robust conversation without worrying about offending somebody. But the IRS takes a very different position on policy issues, on issues that are being debated in society, such as immigration, climate change, abortion, same-sex rights, whatever you have. Those are policy issues, and issues on which various individuals and groups can take positions, including 501c3s. The political process, at least as far as the IRS is concerned, pertains specifically to individual candidates running for elective office. So that's where the break kind of comes. As long as we keep our policy activities completely non-political, and I would stress it's non-political and not just nonpartisan. It's not advocating for any party or any candidate in any ways. We are okay. Well, look, just to give you a clue, I forgot what the title of this is. Lobbying technically means that we're educating the public on matters that are before a legislative body. Education is advocating in public for matters that aren't up for a legislative vote. It doesn't, for our conversation, that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. You can think about all of this as lobbying if you want. So, what can a church do? We absolutely can speak with, write to, go to the offices of elected officials and urge them to adopt our position on a particular policy issue. And we can also urge our own members, our parishioners, to do the same. That is going to incumbents, just like you would in a private context, and say, dear representative, I take this position on this issue. I hope when it comes up for a vote, you'll vote for us. That is a policy problem and not a political problem. We can hold public forums, not candidate, well, we talk about candidate forums in a second, but we can hold public forums to say, let's come together and talk about the issue of homelessness and how it can be addressed. Let's come together and talk about the issue of hunger and how that can be addressed. Church leaders can speak, members can speak, non-political experts, professors, everybody can come and share their views on this and have a robust discussion. We can put up signs on our campuses. We can take positions on our website saying that this is what we believe Jesus teaches on these various issues. And we through our members can participate in non-political rallies and marches, in favor of certain issues. The complication comes, and this is why we're having this discussion, I think, in an election year, is when we're trying to do so-called issues advocacy when we're in the middle of a political cycle. Because we do have that strict prohibition on being involved for or against the election of any candidate to any office, we have to be really careful when there's a political campaign going on. So a couple things to watch out for. In our policy discussions, we can't identify any candidates by name. We also need to be careful about not identifying them by using fonts that are similar to theirs if we're in favor of them, by referring to particular things in their biography, to sort of hint, wink, wink, I'm here, I'm talking about this candidate, hear me. We've got to be scrupulous about being straight down the line. We're just talking about policy. Can't take any position on a candidate's voting record or their political platform. And I will say this as an absolute cannot, I suppose you get away with it, but I would advise, if you're doing issue advocacy, don't talk about election. Don't talk about voting. Don't talk about candidates. Don't suggest anything in your listener's mind that the reason you're talking to them is because there's an election on the horizon. As the IRS says, there has to be a bona fide non-electoral purpose for the reason you've taken a stand and the reason you're making this communication. And just as an aside, I'd say, if you're in a vestry meeting and you're talking about this, make sure your minutes reflect that we're doing this for issues reasons and not for electoral reasons. The service, the IRS does take a little more, well, actually some cycles, a lot more notice of what churches are doing in election cycles. And I would say it's a little late in this cycle to think about this, but in general, if your parish has a history of taking positions on things inside and outside electoral cycles, you'll be in slightly safer shape just because you can say, hey, we've done this all the time and we just happen to be in an election cycle. But I wouldn't let that be a deterrent. I mean, all policy speech tends to go up when there's an election on the horizon. So a couple examples. St. Swithin's Parish takes a strong position that all immigrants who have been in the United States for 2 years or more, who have been here illegally 2 years or more, or who have who have family members who are living here legally should be granted amnesty. So St. Swithin's is in favor of amnesty under certain conditions. So every month, every year, they take an ad out in the local paper that says that position, amnesty for people who under these two conditions. There's no mention of candidates. There's no mention of elections. The IRS would find that perfectly fine. You are educating the public on what you think the law should be in this particular area. Now, what if we think of the same facts, do this every month, but in September and October and November of the election year, the ad is amended to include the line, "This issue is too big to be ignored. On election day, your vote counts." That actually is a violation. Now we've crossed over into the political. We haven't identified any candidate by name or even probably by implication, but we have said that we are advocating that you vote for candidates who take the positions that are similar to ours. We've blurred the line between policy and politics. Again, an ad that doesn't mention elections or candidates, fine. When you start bringing in candidates and elections, you're getting a little bit close to the line. Third example, the rector at St. Swithin's often preaches about amnesty as being a mandate that she finds in Scripture, and the Faith in Action Committee holds quarterly public roundtables to energize and plan lobbying, do fundraising, and the like. Again, so long as none of these activities mention candidates or elections, they're fine. But let's imagine that at the last Sunday in October, the rector, during her sermon, preaches on amnesty and says, "I hope you will use your ballot next month to help make amnesty a reality." Again, a violation in much the same way. You're suggesting to people that the policy position that you're taking, again, the rector of a parish standing at the pulpit, preaching a sermon on a Sunday, taking a position for the organization that suggests that certain candidates, those who are going to vote in favor of amnesty, are better than other candidates. I think that's probably the most important and in some ways maybe the most difficult part of the presentation. So let me just pause there and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, on initiatives then, with a whole bunch, local, City of San Diego, for example, and statewide. Sounds like all we can do is educate people about the content of the initiative. But can we say or can we make a recommendation, yes or no?
We can. Now, here's the twist. I know this will sound a little bit lawyerly, but ballot initiatives, referenda, whatever you want to call it, are considered by the IRS to be legislation. They're legislation being enacted by the public rather than being enacted by the legislature. So yes, because there's no candidate involved, we can take a full-out position, defeat Proposition 13, vote for Proposition 8, because it's a matter of policy and not a matter of politics. Yeah. Okay. Again, in the services, odd way of defining those two things. It's a great question. Yeah. Any other questions?
So could you do a sermon, that kind of talks about how the Episcopal Church has resolutions about women's rights and pro-abortion and et cetera, et cetera. And then after the sermon, can you encourage people to vote?
Yeah, I think you can. I think if you mean like within the sermon?
No, but as people walk out, you're having this thing about, remember to vote, don't, whatever.
Yeah, I don't think there's a huge problem with that. It might not be the safest course of action, but I think, we've laid out certain positions that we take as a matter of policy, and we're also encouraging you to vote. I think if you directly link those two things, like my example, here's what the Episcopal Church believes on all of these issues. Go vote tomorrow for candidates who think the way we do, and that doesn't pass. I think laying out those issues and then separately encouraging people to vote is okay. I think the separation of time, for instance, if the rector did it at the door, on the way out of church, I think would be okay. Any other questions? We'll have time for questions at the end, but I wanted to make sure we can cover that off. All right. Well, if we go to the next slide. So now in the political sphere, so that was the policy part. No candidates, no election, no voting. Now let's come over to the politics part. Now we're talking about candidates. So a couple bright line rules about what we absolutely can't do. No cash contributions of any kind to any candidate's campaign. And we can't encourage anybody else to do that either. So it would be a violation for a rector, I would say, even probably, if you want to be safe about it, even privately, not from the pulpit, to say, hey, we think you should give money to XYZ's campaign. You're kind of bringing the authority of the church to give money to that campaign. Endorsements and oppositions. A church and its leaders can't make any statements that endorse or oppose, either explicitly or implicitly, a candidate for election. So a couple of examples here. One, and this is a real life example, in 1992, a church in upstate New York actually lost its tax exempt status. The IRS revoked it because it took out a full page newspaper ad opposing the candidacy of Bill Clinton. And the IRS said that was a blatant violation of the blanket prohibition against endorsing or opposing candidates. Likewise, a little less blatant but equally troubling, a rector goes to a candidate's headquarters, had a press conference at a headquarters, and endorses the candidate. In this particular case, when the IRS got hold of it, the rector said, "Oh, I really meant to say I was speaking in my own behalf, and not on behalf of the church." The service didn't have a whole lot of leniency and said, "Well, that was a really important omission, and you really need to make that clear." And I think what they were trying to signal is you probably should not have gone to campaign headquarters and done anything of the sort. So be really careful for what our leaders, lay and clergy alike, are saying about candidates, and particularly the closer you get to their campaign in terms of it being their press conference at their headquarters, the more you've got to worry. Another real life example, and this one's from All Saints, Pasadena. This is back in 2004, a guest preacher got up and spoke 2 days before the election, where he imagined a debate among Jesus Christ, John Kerry, and George Bush, who were running for election in that cycle, and concluded by asking the people in the congregation to vote your deepest values on Tuesday. The IRS again found a violation there. Again, we're suggesting with the content of the sermon, I don't really know what the person said in terms of the debate, but the debate, I think, clearly favored one candidate over another, and then suggesting that people go vote their conscience 2 days from now after hearing that. Even though the person was a guest preacher, they were using the authority and the imprimatur of the church. Again, endorsements or oppositions don't have to be explicit. Photos, using campaign imagery, even colors, using suggestive colors that the same as the campaigns can really suggest that you have a political purpose and not a policy purpose. These things don't have to be partisan. So as it says on the slide, and I think this is important, even advocating for voters on the basis of candidates on the basis of characteristics. We want more Black representatives in the legislature. We want more Latino women on the school board. Is a wonderful thing to advocate for, but again, you're taking positions about that these people should be elected over other people, and that violates the rule for candidates. One thing that I find difficult, I don't know, I'll just mention this, I don't think it happens a lot, but if you happen to have a parishioner who is herself running for public office, you might be in a quandary as to what to do. The service doesn't say anything about this. The legal suggestions that I kind of read up on said it's probably okay as a matter of parish news to say that Harry Smith is running for city council, but nothing more than that. Just to acknowledge, just as somebody's changed a job or somebody's moved out of town, Harry Smith is running for city council, and keep it at that. Almost anything else you said about that would probably get you in a little bit of hot water with the IRS. And finally, no in-kind, or what I say on the slides, no benefits to any candidate or campaign. In some ways, the most obvious one is issues briefing. If you are going to issues brief one campaign, one candidate for office, you need to offer to do the same for all of them. It doesn't all have to be at the same time. They don't all have to say yes. But if you're going to share information on a policy basis with one campaign, you really need to offer to share it with all of them. Same for use of your mailing list, for use of your physical facilities, for office space, for fundraiser space, for dinners. If you offer it at all, and I would kind of raise a yellow flag about we're getting close to getting involved with campaigns, but if you feel compelled to offer your parish hall for a dinner for a campaign, charging them a fair market value, you really need to make it available to everyone. That doing business with one campaign, you need to be open to doing business with all campaigns. And I would actually say in an election cycle, you'd be better off probably not going down that road, but it's really up to you. As I mentioned before, the penalties here, while rare, can be pretty draconian. That the service reserves the right to revoke your tax-exempt status for any violation of this rule. One that subjects your church retroactively back to the point of violation to federal taxation, but probably more importantly, donations to the parish are no longer tax deductible. And what I always used to say in practice is, regardless of what the penalty is, you don't want both the inconvenience and the bad publicity of being under investigation by the IRS. So better to steer well clear of these things rather than try to take it close to the line. Any questions on that?
Just as an aside, we used to tell city staff, do your best to avoid even having a picture taken with a candidate.
Yeah, it's not bad advice. I was going to say later, and I'll say it now. If, and Lord forbid, but if you get involved in an investigation of this sort, and it wouldn't be from the IRS in Washington, D.C., but from the local district office, they're going to look at every fact they possibly can, because this is all so nuanced and balanced. And I agree that if what they get in their feed is pictures of the rector with her arm around the candidate or political posters sitting on your front lawn, boy, you're going to have a lot of hard time explaining that. Right? Keep it to the policy. Keep it to the policy.
Yeah.
All right, the final area that I'll go in any depth on is really these get out the vote activities on the next slide. So this again falls back into that education realm that 501c3s are absolutely allowed to do. We're allowed to educate people on the importance of voting, the effect that your vote can have, just like we can on particular policy issues. But we do have to do it really carefully. So it's fine to set up a register to vote or find out where your local polling place is, booth or information kiosk, either on your property or at a fair or at a public park or wherever you're allowed to do it, where you provide forms for people getting registered. You give them the dates of the election. You let them sign up if they need a ride or they want a reminder. But you've got to be really careful. There's no candidate information. There's no party information anywhere in the booth. And that training your volunteers that all they're going to talk about is how to register, how to vote, and how to get to the polling place. That if people try to engage, and some people will be there trying to provoke, if people are going to try to engage you in political conversations about candidates and who you're voting for and why you should vote, the answer has to be, we're not here to talk about this today. All we're talking about is voting. In addition, your call to action, the reason you want to get people registered, the reason you want to get people to the voting place cannot be slanted in terms of one candidate's or one party's position. So here's where we're really getting at that rub between policy and politics, and we need to be very careful. So you can take the position that we need to save America's forests from an ecological point of view. But what you can't say is vote to save the forests, register here. Because now you're kind of taking a position, we want you to register to vote, so you're going to vote for the candidates who are going to save the forests. Or We must increase spending to help the unhoused. Call us if you need a ride to the polls. That's, again, blurring the line between policy and politics and making it sound like we have a position that we want you to go vote for. So what you could say is, this election will set the course for the state of California for the next 2 decades. Do your part and be sure to vote, right? That's a non-political statement. True, right? You know, there's a lot at stake in this election, but it's not saying that one outcome is better than another. It's just encouraging people to get to the polls. Or you can call out the issues in a neutral way. You can say the environment, jobs, immigration, Israel, they're all up to you. Make sure you vote on election day. That, again, is a non-political call to the polls that sensitizes people to the issues that are being discussed, but doesn't convey any particular point of view on them. And likewise, if you were to do a phone bank, and I don't know how many of our parishes are in a position to do this, but if you were to do a phone bank, trying to remind people to get out and vote in the coming days, it's fine to do that. Get a list of registered voters, phone them all. Don't sort them on the basis of party politics. You're going to phone everybody in a certain zip code or in a certain neighborhood. You phone everybody. You don't phone only the R's or the D's or the I's, for that matter, right? And you shouldn't engage in any kind of message conversation. Ask them any questions about their positions. Tell them any position of your own church's positions. Just keep it to the facts. The election is November 5th. We hope you're going to get out and vote. If you need a hand with anything, let us know and we can give you a ride. But no candidates, no parties with that. May mentioned a while ago, you can do voter guides, but here, and as we go, Jason, we could probably just flip to the next slide. Anything where you're going to start talking about individual candidates, their voting records, their platforms, their positions, it is possible. I don't want to leave you with the impression otherwise. It is possible to do these things and not run afoul of the IRS rules, but it is really, really tricky. And I can't underscore enough what May said. If you want to do things like that, if you're burning to do a candidate forum or you're burning to do a voter guide where you lay out the positions of various candidates, partner with the League of Women Voters, partner with another organization that really knows how to do this. They can do it with you. You can put your name on it, but you really want to lean on their expertise and not your own, because this is it's a dicey area, and you don't want to squander the voice that you've got by running afoul of these IRS rules. Gary, did I see a hand, or maybe not? Okay. So I think, oh, and just a word on the internet. It's interesting. You go back to some of these resources. The service first started writing about this in, I think, 2006 or 2007. And the internet was a very different animal back then. I don't think anybody was really using social media. Maybe somebody was, but maybe Mark Zuckerberg was still in his dorm room. But we didn't really have Facebook and all of that. So some of their advice in this area is a little bit dated, but I think it's still valid. You can post anything on your church website, on your church Facebook or Instagram feed that you can say publicly, or you can say from the pulpit, or you can say on your front lawn. If it's a policy position that is devoid of electoral politics, it's absolutely fine to have it out there. But likewise, there's no internet free pass, right? You can't say anything that blurs over into or is explicitly political in favor of a candidate or in favor of voting for people who see it your way online. There's no distinction between what you say with your mouth and what you say on your website. Trickier, of course, as always, when we start linking to third-party content. It's absolutely allowed. You, of course, shouldn't link from your website to a certain candidate's campaign website. That would, almost go without saying, but that would be an obvious endorsement. You could, but for instance, the example, one of the examples the IRS gives is if a local newspaper has covered your church for a particular charitable activity that you do, perhaps a no-cost preschool or something that you sponsor, it is perfectly fine to link to that article even though if they link over to the newspaper's website, within 2 or 3 clicks, you might get to their political endorsement on their op-ed page, or you might get to a whole series of articles about the election and the various candidates. What the service is really looking for is, did you link to that third-party content for a bona fide non-electoral purpose? Here, I'd say yes, we got great publicity for our preschool and we want people to know about it. But if you're linking over there with a wink and a nod to say, what we really want you to look at is this position, is the position the editors of this paper took on the candidates, you're going to get in hot water. So think about why you're linking over, what the content on your own page is suggesting that you should go link, and do monitor. Don't let this go forever. That every once in a while, I'd suggest every couple months at least, click that link yourself and see what it takes you to, and see what's sitting around it. And if you're feeling like it's getting a little political over on the newspaper side, take it down. So just a quick summary. Churches, like all 501c3s, can lobby and educate the public on policy positions. And that does include, to Gary's question, positions of ballot initiatives and referenda, because those are considered legislation and not candidates. But we just can't convey any support or opposition to any candidate while we do so. So keep those two things completely separate. We can encourage people to vote, and we can educate voters, although I put a star next to that, sort of do the voter education about candidates with somebody who really knows what they're doing. But those voter education activities, even the get out the vote activities, have to be absolutely unpartisan and unbiased. So I would keep your issues related activities separate from your get out the vote activities. If you can, I would even have 2 different groups doing that and let them not work together. And we, like all 501c3s, are completely prohibited from taking anything that would suggest, let alone give, support or opposition to any candidate for public office, whether that's through an endorsement, or I guess an anti-endorsement, or by giving things to a certain campaign, or providing them for low cost that we're not willing to give to every campaign. And like I said, just the advice, if you want to get involved with candidates, or you want to lay out their positions in any sort of explicit way, do it with people who really are experts and know what they're doing in that area. And then finally, I think we will put out these slides. These are hyperlinks. These are the first 2 are really good IRS guides written for the public about what public charities can do in general as a 501c3, and then specifically for churches and religious organizations. Think about dioceses and synods and provinces and things like that. 2 great guides written in a really, I mean, you've got to be interested in the topic, but if you're interested, they're very readable. And then a little more daunting, but not really, this IRS revenue ruling back to 2007, 21 different examples of what 501c3s can and can't do. Some of them, you can just do a little translation in your head. Some of them are written about universities, some of them are written about museums, but just sort of substitute the word church in there, and minister or warden for executive director, and I think you'll really see what is policy versus what is politics from the services point of view in a concrete way. I think that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions or follow up with anything.